I mean, this is pretty incredible. I want to give a hats off, a shout out to Ben and the Friends of the Library. When you think about that, we have not just Beth Macy and not just Barbara Kingsolver, but both of them here in the same place at the same time. And even more than that, just like we can go just down the road here and get giant shiitake mushrooms from Richard Moyer, or killer 7-pound birds from Dwayne and Goshen Farm, or exquisite bouquets from Tom and Danny Peterson. These ladies are local. So I think it's, they both have extensive awards and credentials. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to mention some because I think it really is pretty incredible at the level of accomplishment they both have. So I'm just going to hit a few and then we can talk about quick go. So, it's quite the thing. Beth here, Miss Beth. She's won a Nieman Award, Nieman Fellowship from Harvard, a Guggenheim Fellowship. She has been the LA Times Book Prize winner and has had 3 New York Times bestseller. 3 New York Times bestseller. Those are like just scratching the surface of the many accomplishments that have recognized for research, for intellect, and for writing. Barbara has won the Pulitzer Prize. A National Humanities Medal, the American Booksellers Award and American Library Association Awards multiple times, and was named by the Writer's Digest as one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. And that was before she hit her stride. I mean, pretty incredible. But what I want to just mention before I turn it over to them is that when I was finishing up Beth's most recent book, when I was finishing up paper, it occurred to me the kind of common ground between science and deep. One though real, the other just a hair shot of pet. And both of them being these ordinary people. In some respects, society and the economy would consider them less than ordinary. But these ordinary people that persevere, they don't just survive extraordinarily difficult circumstances that would test every one of us in this room. Maybe some of us couldn't hack it. They don't just survive those circumstances, nor do they exactly rise above their circumstances in the sort of J.D. Vance sense, rising. Instead, they just absolutely embrace who they are for all of the baggage and the problems of the families and the communities that they have. And they end up being these heroic figures who not only kind of make it themselves, depending on how you define them, make it themselves, but they also bring other people along. And what I love about Beth, whom I did not know for many years, I've known for 2 years, 2 of which I really thrilled about, and Barbara, who I know for a couple of decades, is that it seems to me that their work is about lifting up ordinary people doing heroic things, but also making it clear that it's about damn time that we change the circumstances so that it doesn't take heroic efforts to just lead a decent life. Thank you.
That's so kind. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Anthony. I want to add my thanks to all of y'all for being here, for buying that ticket that supports Washington County Libraries. I don't know about you, but when I think about when they come for the last defenders of democracy. What I see is librarians standing in front of libraries with a pitchfork. We need our libraries. We love our libraries, and they love us. So thanks, all of you, for the donation you made with your ticket and for being here tonight. Thanks, Anthony, too, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm really excited to talk with my friend Beth, who has been introduced to you. And I'll just add to that, I have a lot of experience with journalists and journalism on both sides of the notepad there. And I have a really easy test for journalists, how to decide if they're a good one or a bad one. Ready? Some of them come to you with the story already written in their head. You know, that's true, right? They're there to check off boxes because they already know who you are, and they just want affirmation of their preconceived notion of your situation. And then there are the good ones who come with no story in their head because they want to hear yours. And this, my friends, is that kind of journalist. Beth listens. And she's such a gifted listener that she's made a career, a long career of journalism and of investigative reporting out of listening. And now, here tonight, we're going to make her talk. So I'm going to make you talk, first of all, about how you came around to this book. It's a memoir. I know that because it says right on the front, a memoir. But really, you know, there are a lot of kinds of memoirs. This one is, I think, pretty unusual because it's mostly not about you, which is what I would expect from you. You tell your story by going back to your hometown, Urbana, Ohio, and go sort of reconnecting with people who you knew back then, and also young people who were in the same place kind of you were, and really start asking questions about what's changed. And so what you end up doing is writing a story about, you write other people's stories, a story about people, about a place that could be every place, about economies and how the world has changed between your generation and theirs. So I want to know how you came to that mode of telling this story.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks to Ben and the Friends of the Library. Abingdon is one of my all-time favorite cities. A lot of dope sick took place right next door, and did a lot of reporting here, and this town has always been so supportive of me. Paper Girl really grew out of an experience as my mother was dying in 2020. She had had a stroke. She was in memory care. She was about to die. We didn't know when exactly. And it happened to be the November of the 2020 election. It was the week. It was the Saturday after the election. And you remember they were recounting the votes in Georgia that day. And my evangelical sister Cookie and I were sitting next to Mom's bedside in her memory care unit. And the hospice nurse's phone blinked. And the hospice nurse said, "Oh, they're calling it for Biden." And my sister Cookie, who had never really said anything political before, said, "You wait, it's fraudulent. He won't win." And Mom was literally breathing like this. And she could have died at any moment. She held on a couple more days, but we didn't know that. And I just had this crystal vision or this question of what has happened to my family? What has happened to my country? and what has happened to my hometown. And then my hometown, when Mom was diagnosed with dementia, we would go home to see her more often to help out. Most of my relatives still live in Ohio. Urbana is about an hour west of Columbus. And Urbana was once a heralded place on the Underground Railroad. In the middle of the town square is a statue of a Union soldier facing north with his head down, because Urbana lost a lot of people fighting for the Union in the Civil War. And now there were Confederate flags flying. So what has happened to my hometown? What's happened to my family? During Trump's first administration, we would go visit Mom, and I would go to see my sister who lived just around the bend from her in the same little condominium complex. And I would say, "Hey, John," to my brother-in-law, "how you doing?" And he would go, "Deplorable." Try to dukes up. And then at 17, my brother unfriended me on Facebook. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he missed our youngest child's theater play at Patrick Henry High School. Sasha was Nathan Detroit, the lead in Guys and Dolls. And their real-life girlfriend, Emily, was Haley. And Tim always came to the plays, and I was like, "What's up? Like, why did you miss the play?" And he goes, "Well, I unfriended you on Facebook, and so I missed your message because of all the liberal shit you post." And I post fact-checked articles, mostly from the New York Times and Washington Post, which they don't get because they get their news from their cable package, which is free to them. And so I wrote a piece about it. It ran in the New York Times on like December 23rd that year. And they only left it open for comments for about an hour, and there were hundreds of comments. And I thought, wow, I'm not alone. You know, now we know that 1 in 5 Americans is estranged from their families because of political differences, and that our polarization is kind of the biggest issue in our country right now. But back then it was kind of new, and I thought, I think I'm onto something with this. So then I pitched the story of going back to my hometown to write not just my memoir of growing up in poverty and how education propelled me out of it and into a much happier, more productive life and away from generations of addiction and poverty in my family, but also how the town itself had changed in the 40 years since I left. And, you know, because of NAFTA and, you know, the hollowing out of middle class. Anthony and I call Anthony up every couple of months, and we'd do a Zoom call, and we would just talk about it. And he would say, no, you're being too hard on rural America. You must understand. And then he would point out, you know, the things Obama did wrong and the Clintons did wrong. It wasn't, the Democrats were the heroes in all of the wrinkles of the story. And how I really had to listen to what people had to say, and I really appreciated that. So I wrote about how it's changed. So about a third of the story is my story, coming up from poverty, and how we have sort of ripped the ladder of mobility away from poor kids today. And then about the town itself, because it's always, I think, instructive to find a town that is a microcosm of a larger issue that's happening, like I did in Factory Man with Martinsville and Bassett.
That's the way to tell a story.
Yeah.
You talk about, you just now spoke about how education was your ladder. I love the term class migrant, which I encountered in this book and have thought a lot about how your chance to go to college was grabbing that ladder, and it was not easy for you to do that. It was hard for you to do that, but it was possible for you to do that. And how that has changed everything about your life, everything. So in this book, I felt like kind of the center of everything was that question of education. What higher education is associated with in people's lives, if they have it, not just a greater lifetime income, but also, you know, living longer, more stability in their marriages and relationships. All of these positive things associated with education, and you talk about how class migration was possible in your time, in ways that are not possible now. Will you talk about sort of what's changed there?
Yeah. When I was in high school, I was always a good student. I was like president of the band and class president one year. Decent. I mean, like I was a solid A- student. I wasn't like top, but I was pretty up there. And all my friends were going to college. All my friends were middle class, professional class. And I didn't think I would ever get to go to college. My dad was a house painter who was kind of the town drunk and rarely worked by the time I was coming of age. My parents were older when they had me. I was the midlife accident. I was an ovarian cyst, if you want to be honest. And so one day, my senior year, our guidance counselor called me aside. He said, there's financial aid. I'll help you fill out the forms. And at the time, my dad wasn't working. My mom test drove cars for a Honda subcontractor, and she was making $8,000 a year. And back then, this is the tail end of the war on poverty. The year is 1982. Because we were so poor, I got the maximum Pell Grant, and that paid for a state college tuition. It paid for room and board. It paid for my books. I had 3 work-study jobs every year, so I could have pizza and beer like everyone else. And believe me, I did. And it saved my life. My editor put, it essentially saved my life. He added essentially, but honestly, I'm not sure I would still be alive today. It put me into a world where I would meet a stable husband and who is the what do you call yourself, the updraft beneath my armpits. And we have 2 kids, and my family's still mired in a lot of the issues that I was mired in. So as part of it is survivor skill, but that same Pell Grant today, the Pell Grant was came out in either 72 or 73, and it wasn't initially called Pell Grant. It was later named for Rhode Island Senator Claiborne Pell, who had the idea of creating a GI Bill for everybody, but they weren't sure how they were going to pull it off in Congress. And the idea came to him as he was skiing down the Swiss Alps. That we would have something that eventually became called the FAFSA, which everybody's like, oh, the FAFSA. But he said we would tie a parent's income by their income taxes to how much money they qualified for. And nobody had thought of that before. And which is so funny, he's in the Swiss Alps skiing. His family once owned all of Westchester County, New York. But he thought about, and this is what we don't have today, he thought about life outside of his zip code, and he wanted to make a difference. He was so frugal, it was said that he wore his portly father's belt after he died, wrapped around his waist twice. I mean, it was really and he came up with this. But today the Pell Grant, because of massive defunding of higher ed, beginning with the Reagan administration, which called the very idea of social mobility through education, higher education, a sociological flim-flammery. And then, it continued under the Clintons, too, under the Clinton administration. And as the state budgets, during recession in the 90s, state budgets for higher ed got cut. And it was like, well, the middle class can still afford to take out these loans. And we slowly went from a system of allowing 4 kids to go to college to one that it would only cover 30% today. And so if I had been born just 10 years later, I wouldn't have been able to die. And I mean, that's a sad thing for me, like just to think about, but think about all those people that didn't get that opportunity to be their best self. And I didn't notice it happening because I'm busy raising kids, working in a newspaper, until I started teaching at a community college in the late 90s. When the kids were little, I took a leave of absence for the paper. And I noticed that the Pell Grant students were kind of looked down on. They were kind of, mocked as being like welfare recipients. And it really ticked me off. And so I started writing about it then for some publications. And I wrote a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Ed. It was called "This Scarlet Pete, Why Pell Grant Students Aren't Slackers." And I told the whole story of how scared to death I was going to college, and I almost hoped our car would break down so I wouldn't have to go because I would miss my mom so much. And I wouldn't know how to use the right fork and anything. And I wrote this piece about how the way they're being treated now and how inspired I was by my Pell Grant students. I taught developmental English, English 101, and that was the kids that couldn't test into English 111. And they were immigrants, and they were mechanics. And one of the mechanics showed up to his class with grease under his fingernails, and I had him do a free writing exercise where they were supposed to write about the best job they had ever had. And he didn't have a single period or comma on the page. It was pretty beautiful what he wrote. And he said, well, I'm going to get a computer. If I get a computer, won't that put in all the periods for him? I mean, the digital revolution had completely passed these people by. And that's when I got my first big play, that how unfair things had gotten. And I got to meet Senator Pell. I got called to give a speech in front of Congress, in front of a bunch of college presidents who was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I had a terrible public speaking phobia. I know. It takes a cook to get me to stop talking. My husband and I would practice in my little musty basement office in our house in Waseda, and he would say, slow down, it's a really important story, and I would choke up telling the story of how he had saved my life. And when I met him, before I had it on the stage, I said, I'm probably going to cry. And he grabbed both of my hands and he said, it's okay if you do. I'm like, do you need a kidney or something?
So those grants that we had access to have plummeted, have been profoundly reduced. And here we are now, not only with limited access, but with a whole different public sentiment about education. I mean, I don't have to belabor it, but this country has put into office a full administration that seems opposed to every aspect of education. Has cut not just science, has cut research, has cut medical research, scientific research, funding for arts development, for the humanities, public radio. I mean, I'm sorry, it's too depressing to go on, but you know what I'm saying. It's like even the idea of fact-checking is now woke. The public sentiment that we're dealing with is curiosity and learning are bad. So how do we get there exactly? And why is there so much resentment towards people who do have education?
Yeah. So we called them a paper girl because I was a paper girl. I literally delivered the paper for many years. And then later when I got to college, I majored in journalism. And I was a college intern for my hometown paper. And so it's a town of about 11,000. There were 8 or 9 reporters when I was a sophomore in college. And now there's one. In the Roanoke Times, where I came, it was with the third paper I worked at. In 1989, there were 65 reporters. Now there's 5. And we have a few other outlets, which is great. But if you read all 3 of them, you get about a third of what you once got from the Roanoke Times. So you have these totally separate epistemological universes, and rarely do the twain meet. And I didn't really realize how bad it was until I started going home to work on this book. I would go home, I would run an Airbnb for 1 month or 1 week a month for about 2 years. And I would just interview people on this. Eventually I would land on the main 4 or 5 subjects, and I would visit them every time, and I would call them in between. And then eventually it got kind of so hard and so painful that about day 4 I would head on home. Yeah, I paid a lot of Airbnb rentals that I didn't use because it was just, I wanted to get home with my husband or my dog and my friends that think exactly like I do. Because what I found out was that lacking a source of news, and we know that News areas that don't have reliable fact-check news went 91% for Trump in the last election. And there is simply no news there. And so I would go home, and sometimes I would stay with my friend Betty, who is a business owner, very successful business owner, and she would ask me about my day, and I would tell her what I learned. Like, school attendance has plummeted, especially since COVID. Graduation dropped. The graduation rate has gone down 12 points just in the last decade. Foster care, which you write about so beautifully, and Demon, has tripled in the last decade. Food stamps, doubled. Mental health emergency calls had gone up by a factor of 9 since I left 40 years ago. So when I picked Silas, this young kid who's supposed to be the promising but poor kid who stands in for a young me, I didn't yet know all that data, but all the data bore out what Silas was experiencing, which is the opioid crisis. His dad had died of overdose. His mom was in and out of prison. He lived with a caregiver for a time who molested him for 3 years. He was homeless his junior and senior year of high school while being the band's drum major. And I asked him recently, we did a little about my hometown, I said, what makes you so resilient? Because y'all, I couldn't have done what he did. I had a lot of fire in the belly, but I was not that resilient. And he said, well, lacking a family, I had a dad that was a drunk, but I had a really great mom who worked her tail off and a grandma next door that owned our house, so we never had to pay rent, which kept us from being homeless some of the time. And he said, lacking a family that could support me, I created my own. And he did it through the band director. I was totally kind of half raised by my band director, who always, I would say he's why I'm not in jail now. And, he did what I did, but he did it times 10. And he gets a scholarship to a community college, but he's a rural kid, and there's no public transportation. So he goes through 5 clunker cars in a 10-month welding certificate program and 4 full-time jobs. I didn't have to work full-time.
Yeah.
It's just really stacked against him.
And you can't blame people for being uninformed when there is no information. I think that's such an important point, that there are huge news deserts in this country.
She didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
But she would love it. And at the end, I let her read the whole thing before it was, after it was copy edited. And, the reaction, some people didn't really like the book. But Betty said, and she's very centrist and very kind of apolitical, she said, I read your book. People aren't going to like it, generally, but I think I need to change my news diet.
There you go. There you go.
And then I started, she's really into decorating, I started sending her decorating articles from the New York Times and Washington Post. Get cable. And she subscribed. Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah. Now, are you all rethinking your subscriptions?
Yeah. There you go. Cardinal News, yes. There are a couple of sentences, more than a couple, a lot of sentences in this book that just gobsmacked me. And here's one I really loved. This is Ms. Beth Macy. Local news once served as democracy's immune system. Isn't that great? An immune system that makes you recognize alien substances and reject them. It's such a good way to put it.
See, you would have said better.
No, it's really good. Deaths of despair are disproportionately concentrated in places where misinformation spreads rapidly. Here's one more thing. I set my timer so that I would know when we get to invite you to ask questions. But I want to cover one more thing, because this is another sort of gobsmack moment in this book. You spent an admirable amount of time, I'm going to say, listening to people with really scary beliefs. That's hard to do, to listen genuinely to people who believe that, and really alarming things. And I have wondered, like these really vanilla kinds of Democrats, like, I don't know, Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks, get accused of really savage things. Yeah, Oprah, of like, pedophilia, a lot of sort of savage acts against children, which I always just thought was crazy, just crazy. Okay, here's what I learned. Here's something I learned from your book, or made me think about. All right, kids living in impoverished, unstable homes are more likely to witness or be victims of savage acts. Children living with stepdads, I'm quoting here, that's why I'm reading, or live-in partners are 10 times more likely to experience abuse. 1 in 4 American girls are sexually abused before age 18, more than 1/3 by family members. Very few perpetrators are reported, fewer are arrested. This is an underreported epidemic. Okay, here's the chilling thing. This is a quote. What did all the non-reckoning with such toxic secrets have to do with the supersizing of our polarization and outrage? Was it that the secrets we bury are the same things we are most apt to fear? As the research psychologist Diane Zuckerman put it, if you know it from your personal experience, then it doesn't seem so outrageous to accuse other people of it, right? Thank you for that observation. Do you want to talk about it a little more?
Yeah, I mean, I worry about some really hard things in my family. My niece was abused by her stepdad when she was 11, I think, and she reported it to a guidance counselor. And her mother didn't believe us, and her minister didn't report it, and it was investigated. And I was a young reporter in Savannah, Georgia at the time, and I would write these letters to the prosecutors, these really fiery letters to the mayor. I'd send it to everybody saying, you need to prosecute this guy. Not just the perpetrator, but also the minister that covered it up. And so, that was a really hard conversation with my sister, with my niece. And it came up over and over, not just in my family. And my niece will tell you today, he ruined my life. And my sister will say, we don't know that happened. Yeah. And as Zuckerman pointed out, because it happens, and it's this shameful thing, it affects the whole family. I've never seen my brother-in-law since it happened because he's not invited to it. It infected the whole family. It gave me panic attacks in my 20s, and I felt like I wasn't doing enough. I had huge survivor's guilt. And, but then as I was going home and I was doing these interviews with my friends, they would bring it out. They would say, well, this happened to me, my dad, and this kind of stuff. And then, do I know that the people I interviewed who cheering on have been sexually assaulted? I don't know that, and I don't say that, but I think the chance is decent that that's right.
If it's part of your world, then it's a simple step to project that onto the people that you're afraid of yourself.
Yeah.
I think that the most important thing in these polarized times is to maintain sympathy for people who don't see the world we do. And this book really helped me with that. And some of these observations are so powerful to just, I think, to help me think about, like, where is this coming from? It's coming from a place of fear. That's how we get across. So I always like to wind up these talks with, and there goes my timer, with the question of where do we go from here? What do we do? Sometimes when people ask me that, I find it very daunting, like, I'm supposed to fix the world. But I wrote a book, right? But it's hard to know. But this woman is running for U.S. Congress. So she has to fix the world.
So tell us how you're going to do that. So it's kind of a wacky idea. And it grew out of really the end of the book. I swear to you, if you read, I do a little manifesto at the end where I say, if you need to touch grass, take a walk with a friend, donate diapers to a diaper bank, and pack Hurricane kits, and get involved in our community. And then I say, we need to run better people for office, people who want to do the most good for the most amount of people. And then last President's Day, February, we had a No Kings protest outside of the POS building, the federal building in downtown. And at the end of it, Roanoke Indivisible organized it. The organizer said, hey, how about we go next Monday and meet outside of our no-show Congressman Ben Klein's office? So it was only 2 blocks away. So we started doing that every Monday from 12 to 1. And then a friend of mine started this nonprofit called Do Good Virginia that was meant to ameliorate the cuts, the Doge cuts, and all these terrible cuts that are coming down. And so she would hold these teach-ins right after the rally, right next, in the building next door, which was the public library. So every Monday from 1 to 2, we have these people come in and talk about how their worlds are being upended, whether it's the woman who runs Blue Ridge Literacy, or the League of Women Voters, which has been reactivated in Roanoke, or NIH cuts and how that's impacting our Biomedical Research Center. And so it's really great, and you get these news you can use things, and they're fantastic. And at one of the rallies, somebody suggested, I've been going, I'd never really protested before as a journalist, but I have been going, and somebody I didn't even know who was standing there, a retired physical therapist with an anatomy course spine, and a sign that said, Ben Klein has no spine. Her name's Kate Birdie, and she suggested that I run a gas step. And I'm like, I don't know how much I was. We don't do that. And then she just kept coming back to me week after week. And then she would have my friends come after me. Really, and Tom said, hey, I thought you were going to write 1 or 2 more books and become a master gardener with our friend Lon and retire. And he's been trying to get me to write a cookbook for years after writing 2 opioid books. And then finally one night, Tom said, we're out in the backyard having a beer, and the latest cuts, you know, the Venezuela, the everything. It's just a new, fresh channel every hour. He said, let's take this enough for now. So I said, very likely I can afford to try it, and we'll see what happens. And we've had a great launch. It's been about 3 weeks, and people are excited. One woman I told, Diane Elliott, used to run Local Roots Restaurant in Roanoke, great local boy restaurant. She burst into tears. She said, I feel hope for the first time in years. So, you know, there's a little movement going on, and we're going to ride it and see where it goes. It's kind of scary and new. So I don't have all the answers, but I'm on this listening tour of the district, trying to find out, you know, and it's the things that we all know is healthcare, it's education, and how unaffordable it is, and it's just general affordability and housing. And, you know, we're not even supposed to talk about it. We're arresting journalists now, and they're shooting people in the water.
Yeah. Well, we can't all run for Congress. We can all vote, though. And sadly, we're in the wrong district. Boy, are we in the wrong district. No more will I say about that. I love where I live. But we can all do what we can. I mean, I think your idea is of touching grass is where it starts. Start where you are. You can't, I mean, this will change from the bottom up.
And it has to.
It has to.
People are fed up.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a real change with Virginia and Abigail, Tennessee.
Yep. There is hope. So this is your time to ask questions of this fabulous author. So if you raise your hand and holler, I'll repeat the question so everybody can hear it. Come on, you've got things to ask. Yes.
Yeah, this is not political. It's reading it, Beth, and first of all, we could talk about your stuff too for a long time. It is just, I really felt for you interviewing your family and then putting that in writing. So just how that was with talking with your family and then.
Sure. This is, I'll repeat the question. The question is about the vulnerability of interviewing your family, including people who believe your children are going to hell. Bringing compassion to that conversation, listening, but then also writing it and putting it in a book for everybody to see. How do you manage that?
Well, first I reported out how to do the interviews. So I talked to people like Anthony, gave me a lot of advice. People like our mutual friends, Kathy Kramer, who's a sociologist in Wisconsin, psychologists, people who study how to bridge the divide. And they all said, go be with your family and don't talk about politics. Just remember, what is the most generous version of the story you have of your family? And try to celebrate those things. So in my family's case, it was our feisty mom who was just so funny. And so when I go back, we try to connect over things mom said or did or faked for us or cooked for us. And we played cards. We drank beer. We have this hilarious toast. I'll do it at the end if somebody reminds me that this terribly bawdy Irish toast that my mom would always give. And we always do that. We fished. We didn't go on vacation. We had no money. We went inner tubing one time, my mom and I, down the Mad River. It was like the most vacation we ever had. And my mom carefully tucked her cigarettes in a plastic baggie. It wouldn't get wet. And then when she tipped over, she lost her bifocal. But her cigarettes would dry. You were talking about that for years. And so they all said, do that. And my husband and I bought a little cabin in rural Craig County on a creek. And I gave out the fishing. I invited my brother up, the one who had unfriended me on Facebook, and because the cabin came with a bunch of fishing rods. And I remembered loving fishing, but I didn't really remember how to set the rod out in my sister. And I wanted to spend more time with him. So I invited him and his wife did this really nice visit. We're standing in the creek. I'm catching a lot of fish. I said it, a lot of fish, and we're not talking about politics. Briefly, he brings up RFK and his support for RFK, and I'm literally putting a worm on a hook. This is a really bad pun, but I don't take the bait. I don't. Yeah, sorry. But we're having such a good time that later we're having a beer on the deck. And Tim says, because he knows our youngest, Sasha, had recently come out as non-binary, and he says, well, tell me, does he still date girls? And he said it just like that. He said it not in a judgy way, like he wears funny clothes, whatever. He said it in a way like an uncle would say, and a nice uncle. And I said, well, yeah, they're dating a young woman now, yes. And I mess up the pronouns too. And I just reflexively mirror that. But it's like if you can grasp onto the best of what they're trying to say, I think that's really helpful. I get that question a lot. I get help, Christmas is coming. I want to go home. What do I do? And I say, do go home. You don't have to spend the whole day, but do go home. You might need a kidney from Uncle Eben. It's just, there are ways to get illness. And my brother and I found our way back to each other. He now comes to see Sasha's band, Palmyra. He drove 8 hours for the album release show in Charlottesville from Ohio. Sat in the back with a bad hip, tapping his toe. He's been to 4 or 5 shows. He's a super fan on Facebook. And, friended me again. And we're good. And it didn't work that way. I mean, that's my best story. It didn't work that way with everything.
It doesn't always, but it can sometimes. And you can always try. I think that it feels virtuous. I get this from people younger than ourselves. This virtue in deleting a person that you don't agree with. We get nowhere that way. We get nothing in terms of human progress by cutting off the people that are different from us and refusing to talk. It doesn't prove anything to cut off a person who has different beliefs from you. It only proves that you're as closed-minded as they are. It's really hard, it's really scary, and it's absolutely necessary to keep going home and having those conversations. That's a good question, thank you. Any others? Come on, people. Yes, back in the back.
So, my family is very conservative. What few liberals of the family. So when we hang out together, I'd always become a token liberal, have to answer or defend liberal positions for whatever kind of the world. But when we talk about it and break it down, we don't seem to be that far apart in terms of what we think is right or right. The point. I thought that would they vote for, but I imagine based on the politics that was shared with me that they vote very different. Not you.
Yeah, so most of us want the same things. We have different information and different beliefs about how to get there. So did you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll switch to this. How are we so polarized now? We don't seem to be that far apart on the issue.
How is it that we got to thinking of ourselves as so very polarized?
I'm going to flip it to you when I'm done.
Pardon me?
I'm going to flip it to you, too.
Okay.
I want to get your take on it. But I think so much of it is the media environment. You know, the fairness doctrine, Reagan got rid of that. That was the thing that said if there's an editorial on this broadcast station or channel, there would have to be an opposing point of view. So that paved the way for my brother-in-law, John, who called me, horrible, to listen to Rush Limbaugh all day long. And then when the digital world became big, we didn't get out in front of it and regulate. And now if you saw Trump's inauguration, all the big tech bros, they're running the show. They're billionaires. They're going to Mars multiple times.
They could stay.
They can buy their gas. And so I think that's a lot of it. And lies, we know MIT did a study last year showing that lies spread 6 times faster than the truth on social media. And so I really do think a lot of it is our media diet and these silos that we operate in, such that it's possible for my first friend that I've known since the first day of kindergarten, who is a lay minister and did my mom's funeral. That's how close we were. She took me to school every day in high school. Can say to me that she's black and she doesn't believe George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin. Or she thinks children are identifying as cats and bringing litter boxes to school. And when I roll my eyes, which the experts say you shouldn't roll your eyes, sometimes you gotta roll your eyes. She said, I know. How do we love each other beyond what we can't understand or agree with? And how do we love each other beyond what we can't understand or agree with? I quote you at the end because you posted after the election, love persists if we tend it like a flame.
I guess I always ultimately think like a biologist. We're animals. We evolved in small groups, in social groups. We have strong instincts to protect what we know and to fear the stranger. And I think so much of civilization and so much of the goodness of humankind has been a long project of conquering the fear of the other, the fear of the stranger. But it will always be with us. That instinct saved us. The capacity to look across the savannah and see someone coming and saying, is it us or is it them? You got to decide fast. That's just in us. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that it's in us because it doesn't make it the best of us. Just the fact that it is means that we have to be creative and mindful about how to conquer this these tribal inclinations we have, to make a decision that I will try to be with people who aren't just like me. I mean, so much of it is, well, of course I agree with you, our news has become very siloed. Our lives have become siloed. Working class people associate with working class people. The people who made all those decisions about globalization and NAFTA grew up without any friends who did shift work. I mean, that's, because they were put in the kindergarten and the school and then the Harvard and didn't even know any janitors. So you just don't think about the people that you don't know. So, I mean, I write books to try to, I write fiction because I think it's a way to introduce people to lives that are different from their own. Reading fiction introduces you to, I invite all of you to write books if you like, but also to read, I think now I'm giving my manifesto. I think anything that we do that encourages empathy across the lines that naturally are drawn around us helps us to be better humans and brings us back.
Thank you. That is so true. And I felt that way when I was reading Demons, which is my favorite book of all time. I'm not just saying farce.
Thank you.
But when Dopesick was made into a Hulu series, one of the writers in a room was standing in the line at a CBS in New York City, and he had a Hulu mask on. It was COVID, and a woman behind him said, "Hey, I just watched that show on Hulu, Dopesick. Have you seen it?" And he goes, "Oh, actually, I worked on that show." And she said, "I watched that show, and for the first time in 3 years, I called my addicted son." And so, you think about your book, my book, newspaper feature stories, which basically don't exist anymore, that would tell you about the young girl that was the library page that was the first in her neighborhood to go to college and she went to Harvard, or how these families are doubling up during the recession because they've lost their jobs and they don't want to be homeless. We just don't know those stories.
Yeah.
And that's why the book just really struck a chord, and why we need to keep reading and telling these stories.
And talking to our neighbors, even if they voted differently from us. We still got to talk to. There is still, I guess, we still have things to learn from each other.
Yes.
Question. I saw a hand back there. Yes. Yes.
How do we get people did you get any sort of inkling when you were interviewing students at your old high school? Like, how often do they read books? You talk about, K-walls for newspapers, but most are read at the library. How do we get people to read more books?
Well, I think there's still some really great teachers out there and some really great librarians, and they are kind of the heroes of my book. They're still leading the way. The band director is a great character in the book. And, but, reading is on that decline. The AP teacher at Urbana High School where I went, has gone from teaching 12 books a year to 4. And that was a telltale.
Yeah.
Faye. And then when she taught, the Crucible, the parents complained that you're promoting witchcraft. She goes, "No, that's the point." They weren't real witches. It's funny, but it's sad.
It is. It is sad. Well, and so, we support our public schools.
Yeah.
When our friends say, "Should I take my kid out of the public school and send him over?" And we say, no, you follow your kid to the public school and you show up for the PTA. Investing ourselves in our last remaining public institutions, our schools and our libraries, public transportation, if only we had it. Those things are still the best of my country. It's the glue of democracy. So, and all of us can do something to support those institutions. And you did tonight, and I thank you so much. We're about out of time, I think. One more question, okay. Oh, we need the mother's toast.
Okay, it's pretty bawdy, it's pretty bad, it's not politically correct. But every time I would go to town, Tom and I would call it cycling to the blue dot. She went in the super rural, very red little towns like, near Urbana. And Tom and I would ride our bikes over to Yellow Springs, which is this little hippie town. So we were doing it even then, right? Segregating ourselves. But I would take Mom to this pub there called the Old Trail Tapper, which is the oldest bar in Ohio. And we'd get a beer, and then she would go, hold your glass up. Here's to the girl who lives on the hill. She won't do it, but her sister will. Here's to her sister. That's all I got. Dang, too bad.